Urgent, the Caucasian trap has snapped shut with a deafening crash. With a single maneuver, Kyiv knocked the ground out from under Putin's feet. Moscow, farewell forever. Yerevan and Baku have officially raised a steel fist over the Kremlin. Shock has struck Mariupol. Azov burst in with fire and vengeance. Russia's vaunted defense has been torn to shreds. The final sweep has begun. The Kremlin shuddered in terror. A merciless reckoning has begun. At this very moment, a conspiracy is unfolding in the heart of Moscow. Russian generals have simply played Putin for a fool. The dictator was not told what really happened in Donbas. Who is really running Russia while Putin plays with toy soldiers? All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. The Caucasian trap for Putin. Yerevan and Baku are officially raising their fists over the dictator's head. Zelensky is turning the game around. A meeting with Pashinyan in Yerevan and tough agreements with Aliyev. The ground has been swept from under Putin's feet. Moscow is in a panic. The loss of the Caucasus is inevitable. Watch for the details. A geopolitical shift. Armenia, which for decades depended on the Kremlin for security, is now hosting leaders from all over Europe. Yerevan hosted the first ever bilateral EU-Armenia summit. This event followed the 8th summit of the European Political Community, which was held in the country.
Reaching the mountain summit, at long last,
The EU summit in Yerevan demonstrates that the European security model is replacing ineffective structures like the CSTO. The post-Soviet space has ceased to be an internal affair of the Kremlin.
Clearly, after the most recent Armenian-Azerbaijani war, it became obvious to everyone in Armenia that Russia was ready to abandon Armenia without much concern and that it would do nothing for them. And this marked Armenia's turn towards the West, towards Europe. And the European Community Summit is, in a way, evidence of this vector of Armenia's development for the near future.
The presence of Volodymyr Zelensky at the summit and his direct participation in the event is a clear declaration that the era of Russian dominance in the Caucasus is over and the Kremlin's old methods of control no longer work. The president of Ukraine also held a meeting with Armenian Prime Minister Pashinyan.
It is clear that Armenia is now more oriented towards Europe, which is a partner of Ukraine, rather than towards Russia. Therefore, in principle, it is even ready to go so far as to invite the president of Ukraine to Armenia, which many in Russia perceived as something of a slap in the face, an insult to their imperial grandeur. Various Z propagandists and so-called war correspondents, of course, were furious. They fiercely demanded that the Russian peacekeepers in Gyumri, there are 5,000 of them there, immediately attack Zelensky and capture him, and so on in that vein. Well, naturally, all of this is not serious, but it is a slap in the face. Well, obviously, they won't acknowledge it publicly.
Russian influence in the South Caucasus is rapidly declining. The Kremlin is losing its position as a key player, and the region is actively reorienting itself toward new allies.
A region where it had been present for quite a long time, since the days of Peter Dash. They did not try to stop controlling this region. But now it turns out that their influence there is rapidly declining, and declining as even among states hostile to each other, such as Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Let us recall that on April 25th, Vladimir Zelensky made his first visit in years of full-scale war to Azerbaijan. The parties solidified agreements in the areas of security, energy, and the defense industrial complex.
There was cooperation even before the period of full-scale invasion. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, it only intensified. Ukraine has always recognized the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan has always recognized the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. And right now, the possibilities for military, technical, and other forms of cooperation with Azerbaijan are being discussed quite actively. For Ukraine, Azerbaijan is a potentially very important partner, just as Ukraine is for Azerbaijan.
Relations between Azerbaijan and Russia are in a state of deep crisis, of trust. The visit of Volodymyr Zelensky became a powerful catalyst for this deterioration, although
for many decades leading up to the eventual outbreak of open conflict, various political and social tensions had been steadily building up and intensifying across the entire region, creating an increasingly volatile atmosphere that many observers felt was becoming completely unsustainable for the nations involved. Clearly, they are now looking to new partners.
Russia's status as a great power is a thing of the past. Today, the Kremlin is merely a secondary player in global affairs, forced to adapt to realities over which it no longer has any real influence. The ground is slipping from under the occupiers' feet. Azov is already in Mariupol. What the Kremlin feared more than death has happened. The steel warriors of Azov have broken through the Russian defenses. Thunder roars where the occupation tears the sky apart. The trap for Russian troops has finally snapped shut. The first footage of the strike of retribution, this is something you have to see. Watch for all the details. Azov is returning to Mariupol, but for now only in the form of reconnaissance and strike drones. But the main thing is something else. Ukrainian drones are already entering places where the occupiers once felt.
Everything has been thoroughly checked and verified, so you can rest assured that the entire situation is now completely and totally safe for everyone involved right now. The government of Ukraine is evaluating the strategic possibility of returning all of its occupied territories through the application of military force. This would involve using direct force to reclaim its land and achieve these sovereign objectives.
So what does this mean? That Russia can no longer maintain its own security even deep in the rear?
Moreover, the shortage of air defense systems is not only, or even primarily, a problem of the Russian military-industrial complex, but rather the fears of the Russian dictator, which the Ukrainian intelligence community is skillfully exploiting. At the moment, almost all air defense systems have been relocated to Moscow and the Moscow region. And as I understand it, not on a temporary but on a permanent basis.
Azov states that their pilots patrol roads up to 160 kilometers deep from the front line. In their sights are Mariupol, Donetsk, and the logistics of the Russian army.
This is what puts the Russian army's capabilities on pause. The redeployment of operational reserves for conducting the next active phase of the offensive against the positions of Ukraine's defense forces. Control over rail logistics nullifies the capabilities of the regular units of the Russian army. At the moment of personnel rotation, delivery of ammunition, delivery of fuel and lubricants, and accordingly evacuation of the wounded.
Mariupol is not just an occupied city for Russia, it is a key hub. That is why any Ukrainian strikes and control over this direction are extremely painful for Moscow.
Accordingly, all logistics for the Russian occupation forces when transferring operational reserves go precisely through this port city. In other words, this allows the Russians to quickly transfer both armored vehicles and accordingly personnel, fuel and lubricants and ammunition.
Earlier, Ukrainian drones had already attacked energy facilities and the military infrastructure of the occupiers in Mariupol. Substations, warehouses and Russian logistics points have come under attack. There is
the very first option available that we can see here.
Moreover, it's not just about this occupied city anymore. The Russians also consider Donetsk to be a deep rear area. Earlier, Azov stated that Ukrainian drones had effectively taken control of Russian logistics routes around occupied Donetsk.
Demonstration flights of Ukrainian UAVs, both over the center of Donetsk and accordingly strikes on Mariupol, are outside the range of the Russian air defense system. In other words, it is made clear that now the logistics of the occupying forces are under fire control for several hundred kilometers, deep into the territory.
But the depth of the strikes will only increase. And this already changes the very logic of the war. If earlier Russia calmly used the occupied cities as a safe military hub, now any convoy, warehouse or equipment can be destroyed literally on the move.
This is the tactic of rusting leaps. That is, accordingly, it is a phased approach to preparing offensive operations. First, the logistics of the occupiers are brought under fire control. Then, accordingly, strikes are carried out on command and control points, and the temporary permanent deployment point of personnel, and only then the direct conduct of counter-offensive operations.
Azov has already returned to Mariupol, for now through the eyes of drones and strikes on Russian logistics. But for the Kremlin, the problem lies elsewhere. The front line is gradually fading away, and the cities that Moscow considered its deep rear are increasingly turning into territories where Russia no longer feels in control. Shock, the dictator is trapped. The generals are making a fool out of Putin. They feed the dictator cartoons instead of the truth as a trial run. Donbas is lost and he doesn't even know it. You will be shocked by the large-scale conspiracy at the very heart of the Kremlin. While he examines drawn maps, real losses are off the charts, and the offensive has stalled. See the details.
Russian generals are deceiving Putin.
I don't see anything out of the ordinary here.
Despite the catastrophic situation at the front, the Ministry of Defense of the aggressor country reports to the Kremlin about imaginary conquests of more and more territories. Meanwhile, the Russian army is supposedly winning so actively that their rate of advance over the past 3 months has become the lowest since 2023. According to analysts, if the current trend continues, it will take Russia decades to fully occupy
the region of the Donbas. They don't want to communicate with their own leadership because all Putin is selling them is war.
Nevertheless, Russian commanders convinced Putin that their troops could fully capture the Donbas by autumn, which apparently greatly encouraged the bunker dweller.
He was convinced of this by his own generals, who claimed that the front was supposedly collapsing and that soon Ukraine would have none left. No soldiers left to defend the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. That is precisely why negotiations are unrealistic at this point.
But first of all, this puts an end to all the speculation, fantasies, and discussions about how peace has suddenly become closer, that there is some kind of secret agreement that Xi Jinping or Trump will negotiate peace in Ukraine, or that Putin and Trump will secretly agree on something. All. Green alphabet.
However, the Russian army is in fact incapable of seizing Donbas by force. This means that the Kremlin has decided to gain new territories without any fight at all. President
Volodymyr Zelensky must issue a formal command to the Ukrainian armed forces to immediately cease all hostilities. Then,
allegedly, Bunker Knee is ready to sit down at the negotiating table and give the order for a ceasefire. I
think that things are coming to an end, but still, this is a serious matter. We have never been close to negotiations. Never.
But all of this is just another Putin ploy, military analysts assure. After taking the well-fortified Ukrainian outposts in Donbas without a fight, Pinya will immediately give the order to prepare a new offensive.
Putin hopes that if the operation to take control of Donbas is completed, he will then be able to expand his demands further, which in particular will include the territory of Kherson and Zaporizhia regions.
Let's be honest, even the bunker dweller himself, just a few minutes after declaring his readiness to sit down at the negotiating table, he openly admits that he has no intention of talking, let alone ending the war.
The armed forces must concentrate their full efforts and attention toward the details of the final statements of the enemy within the framework of the special military operation.
According to Western media citing sources in the Kremlin, Putin's real goal is at least all of left bank Ukraine, as well as Kyiv and Odessa. However, although the Russian generals nod along with the bunker dweller, in reality, they don't believe in such a scenario, even hypothetically. The same goes for the Kremlin elites. They are actively trying to dissuade Putin from continuing the special military operation. Maybe they consider themselves the smartest and most cynical ones there, secretly snickering about it when the cameras aren't rolling. And the spirit of the late Chechetov floats around there saying they got played like kittens. In reality, they themselves find it funny, but surely, except for the most thick-headed among them, they understand that this is nonsense, that it's pure fantasy. Nevertheless, they keep waving this piece of paper around, but for the bunker dweller, it all goes in one ear and out the other, no matter what people are gossiping about in the Kremlin. Putin has once again become obsessed with the idea of taking Kyiv in 3 days. And the only thing that might convince him to abandon this idea are Ukrainian drones destroying the remnants of his military-industrial complex and oil refineries. Should someone give them credit, the Ukrainian armed forces have excelled at this. So much so that it's becoming harder every day for Russian generals to lie to the old man about victories at the front, amid the constant sound of air raid sirens in Moscow and blazing chaos at oil ports deep in the rear.
Poland is getting fired up. Nawrocki and Zelensky are preparing a strike that will shatter the Kremlin's plans. Warsaw is throwing all its might behind supporting the Ukrainian armed forces. The Kremlin wanted to destroy NATO but got a tough response instead. These agreements made Kremlin propagandists choke with hysteria. See the details. As part of the Bucharest 9 summit, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Polish President Karol Nawrocki.
Poland is definitely in the risk zone, and the Poles understand this perfectly well. And this is regardless of who is in power in that country, because the situation there is also complicated, especially when it comes to the political landscape. Nevertheless, both the government and the current presidential administration, as well as the members of the Polish parliament, very much understand that in reality, we all share the exact same enemy. That common enemy is the Russian Federation.
In the corridors of the summit, politicians discussed bilateral relations between the countries. President Zelensky wrote about their importance on the social network X.
It is important that there is a common position. It is necessary for these relations to be truly strong and neighborly. We discussed our potential contacts in the near future. I also informed them about our diplomatic efforts. In all our efforts, unity between Europe and the United States is crucial.
Zelensky also thanked Poland and the Polish people for all their support during the full-scale Russian aggression. The President of Poland in turn assured that the support would continue.
It is of the utmost importance for us that every single one of the nations involved in this format are, let's say, in an exceptionally close and strategic cooperation with Ukraine. And I think that it is quite evident that many of them clearly understand what significant risks the current government of the Russian Federation poses to all neighboring countries that, in one way or another, share a direct physical or maritime border with Russia, whether that be across the vast landmass or throughout the surrounding sea. It is also worth noting that there were representatives from the northern European countries as well. This is also very important to keep in mind, especially when considering that the northern European states also fall into this category, under Moscow's scrutiny.
Nawrocki also stated at the summit that Russia threatens all of Europe.
We warned that Russian revisionism is not a temporary phenomenon. We warned that imperial thinking has returned to Europe. We warned that deterrence cannot exist only on paper.
In addition, Poland continues to be one of Ukraine's key partners in the field of defense.
And it is worth noting that Ukraine purchases various types of weaponry from Poland. Furthermore, the two parties had also previously reached a comprehensive agreement regarding the joint production of various types of certain modern technologies, focusing in particular on the development of advanced unmanned aerial systems. And quite obviously, the nation of Poland continues to be an exceptionally important strategic partner for us. It serves as a vital logistical hub that remains critically important for the ongoing operations and the mutual interests of both of our countries in the region.
Alongside the transfer of equipment, Ukrainian-Polish relations are reaching the level of exchanging experience in technology and industrial cooperation. Hungary retaliates against Moscow for Zakarpattia. Budapest stabs the back Putin's ambassador summoned following shelling in Zakarpattia. The Orban era is over and the Magyar has declared diplomatic war on Moscow. A complete 180-degree turn. Hungary is no longer a quiet haven for Russian agents, but a new nightmare for the dictator. Details in the report. It seems that Russia is beginning to lose its last truly convenient ally in Europe.
The Russian capital of Moscow is probably losing one of its most powerful and influential allies in the region.
I know.
After one of the most massive attacks on Zakarpattia since the beginning of the full-scale war, the new Hungarian government of Péter Magyar openly opposed the Kremlin for the first time.
A Shahed suicide drone is currently flying over the Dragobrat area.
Mukachevo, Uzhhorod, Svalyava, and other settlements in the region where a large number of ethnic Hungarians live came under attack. While former Prime Minister Orban preferred to remain silent for years, the new government responded on just the 5th day of its term.
The government of Hungary strongly condemns Russia's attack on Zakarpattia.
An even more humiliating blow for the Russian Federation came from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Anita Orban summoned the Russian ambassador and demanded an explanation as to when Moscow intends to end this war.
And Ukraine is effectively gaining an additional ally. One that will support it not only in the European Union but also in other areas as well. This includes cross-border cooperation and so on. All these issues are very important for both Ukraine and Hungary.
And judging by the first statements from Hungary's new prime minister, Budapest is gradually beginning to move away from its previous pro-Russian stance.
An important message condemning the Russian attack on Ukraine from Hungarian Prime Minister Péter Magyar. Moscow has once again demonstrated that it is a common threat not only to Ukraine but also to neighboring countries in Europe as a whole. The attack continues. The first missiles are being launched. Our united stance is crucial for ending this brutal war. Thank you for your concern and strong position.
At his first major press conference after winning the election, Péter Magyar called Ukraine a victim of Russian aggression. And he promised to urge the Russian dictator to end this war if they ever have a conversation.
If Vladimir Putin calls me, although I don't believe he will, I will answer the phone. But I will not be the first to call him.
At the same time, Budapest will continue its pragmatic dialogue with Moscow. But Hungary is already talking about the need to diversify energy supplies, reduce dependence on Russia, and is ready to unblock European aid to Ukraine.
We cannot rewrite geography. Russia will remain here and Hungary will remain here. We will do everything to diversify, but that does not mean we will completely isolate ourselves. We will always buy oil in the cheapest and safest way possible. However, look at what happened with the Druzhba oil pipeline. It is obvious that Hungary's energy supply is under threat.
And this rhetoric is radically different from Orban's, which means it will become increasingly difficult for Moscow to block aid to Ukraine. Sanctions and key decisions of the EU. And in the end, the great ones are once again left with nothing. Putin declares a major war, a law on invasion is adopted, and the Kremlin has legalized the seizure of new countries. Who is next on the list for destruction? This is the official start of a global conflagration. In Russia, a monstrous law was secretly passed that gives the dictator free rein. See the details. Russia may attack another country. The State Duma has passed a law allowing President Putin to use the army abroad under the pretext of protecting Russian citizens. In fact, this is the legalization of future military operations. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War note that this is not just a document, but the preparation of an informational and legal basis for aggression. After all, the Kremlin has repeatedly used the claim of Russians being oppressed as a pretext for invasion, particularly in Ukraine.
This newly enacted law significantly broadens and extends Vladimir Putin's legal power and executive authority to deploy and use military force well beyond the sovereign borders of the Russian Federation. Under the guise of protecting their fellow compatriots, as they so often call it, this move serves as a very clear and undeniable signal of Russia's absolute readiness to further expand its ongoing campaign of aggression across the region.
Now, the geography of potential targets has expanded. In the rhetoric of the Russian authorities, the Baltic countries, Moldova, and other states with Russian-speaking populations are regularly mentioned. It is precisely there that Moscow may try to repeat a familiar scenario, and this is no longer just a theory. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russia has effectively begun the so-called zero phase of preparation. This refers to the restructuring of military districts and the creation of new bases, particularly near the border with Finland.
First and foremost, this situation primarily concerns the three Baltic countries, which the Kremlin leadership still stubbornly perceives as nothing more than a severed limb of the former Soviet Union, or Mother Russia herself. In general, they view these nations as an inherent part of their own rightful territory, where supposedly, for a period of more than 30 long years, innocent Russian speakers have been systematically oppressed and marginalized by the local authorities. And it is precisely there, where the concentration of these compatriots is highest, that the Kremlin is constantly creating such tension. There are many stories one could recall. For example, the incident with the bronze soldier in Estonia. There is the ongoing pressure on Estonia itself in Narva. There is the hysteria regarding the Latgalian People's Republic in Daugavpils, Latvia.
At the same time, other alarming signals are being recorded. In Europe, the number of acts of sabotage, provocations, and cases of GPS jamming is increasing. Analysts believe this is part of a hybrid preparation for possible future operations. Some experts remind us that the Kremlin made similar decisions before the annexation of Crimea and the full-scale invasion in 2022. Ukraine has already responded to the document. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that this law demonstrates the true nature of the Russian regime and in fact legalizes new interventions.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Georgi Tiki called this decision aggressive lawlessness and emphasized that Russia is turning war into an instrument of state policy.
A clear and compelling illustration of this phenomenon can be observed in the specific example of the unfounded and highly controversial allegations that the Russian Federation launched as a central component of a sophisticated and wide-reaching strategic disinformation campaign during the month of April in the course of this current year. These accusations concern the alleged provision by the nations of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania of their territories for the launching of attacks by Ukrainian drones. And in general, there were even claims about not just the use of airspace, but actual launches from there, which is, in fact, a blatant lie. However, we are currently witnessing this situation unfolding right before our eyes. And why exactly is the Kremlin actively pursuing such a potentially dangerous and significant escalation of the ongoing war? It has become increasingly obvious to observers that this is a calculated attempt to change the overall course of a war that has essentially become a protracted and difficult strategic stalemate and dead end for the Russian Federation.
Moreover, Ukrainian diplomacy draws historical parallels, particularly with the rhetoric of Nazi Germany, which also justified aggression by claiming to protect its citizens abroad.
An additional signal comes from statements by Russian officials, in particular, accusations against Finland and the Baltic states of allegedly assisting Ukraine. Analysts believe this may be an attempt to create a pretext for future border violations.
If Putin signs the law, it will come into force in just 10 days. And then Russia will have yet another tool to legitimize aggression under the guise of protecting its citizens. A scenario the world has already witnessed, and one that could repeat itself in new countries. That's all for now. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.